We have breaking news tonight in the war between Donald Trump and the NFL. At tonight's Monday Night Football game, the teams and coaches once again took a stand against the president's comments about firing NFL players who dare to exercise their First Amendment rights during the playing of the national anthem. And this war of presidential words versus protest symbolism is happening at a time when it may be that we have never been closer to nuclear war. North Korea says they believe we have declared war on them. They think the President of the United States has declared war on them. At the same time, the President has an unprecedented disaster, as Rachel was just talking about, an unprecedented disaster to deal with in the island territories of the United States in the Caribbean. Puerto Rico's economy was already in disastrous condition, and now the island has been wiped out. Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands have always had the guarantee that if anything like this happens, they have an advantage that other Caribbean islands don't. They have the full support of the United States of America. They've always believed that they could count on the commander-in-chief commanding the resources and aid that the islands need. Until now. This weekend, the president's attention was not devoted to the deadly disaster that hit the American citizens on our Caribbean islands. He was too busy talking about football, talking about knees and flags.
Wouldn't you love to see one of these NFL owners, when somebody disrespects our flag, to say, get that son of a bitch off the field right now, out, he's fired. He's fired! When people like yourselves turn on television and you see those people taking the knee when they're playing our great national anthem.
The president is also very, very angry about the NFL's lack of respect for the beauty of the violence of the game.
You know, today, if you hit too hard, right? They hit too hard, 15 yards, throw him out of the game. They had that last week. I watched for a couple of minutes, and two guys just really beautiful tackle. Boom, 15 yards. The referee gets on television. His wife is sitting at home. She's so proud of him. They're ruining the game, right?
The president was not content to say that the referee is ruining the game by enforcing the NFL rules. He had to extend that attack on NFL referees to say that the referees are doing that to impress their wives. He felt the need to squeeze in that bit of misogyny, that bit of blame the woman somehow for what happens on an NFL field. The president spoke of the lost glory of the violence of the NFL, the day after it was revealed that former Patriots tight end, 27-year-old Aaron Hernandez, had the kind of brain damage that had previously only been seen in NFL players in their 60s. The New York Times reported, quote, the brain damage was so severe that scientists all but gasped. Here's a picture of Aaron Hernandez in the courtroom where he was found guilty of murder. We don't have a picture of Aaron Hernandez in the prison cell where he killed himself, but we do know that on his Sundays in prison in Walpole, Massachusetts, he could hear the roar of the crowd at the Patriots games in nearby Foxborough. In the President of the United States, if the President of the United States was going to speak about football on Friday, you could expect it to be possibly something in reaction to the Aaron Hernandez autopsy findings, something about the public health crisis facing football, the concussion crisis. You might expect the president to say something to worried parents, not sure whether they should allow their kids to play football, now that we know the younger the brain, the higher the risk of damage during the normal patterns of contact in football. But this president wanted to make the violence of football a Trump campaign agenda, a Trump agenda item, put it right up there with building the wall. Violence in football, Donald Trump's in favor. There is beauty in football. Most of it is in the halftime show, but there is genuine athletic beauty in pass plays, especially the long pass plays. We have some of them recorded in our brains for the rest of our lives. Some of them are miraculously beautiful. Doug Flutie's name will live forever in football on the basis of exactly one pass play, because it was so dramatic with 1 second left on the clock and so very beautiful. I've heard a lot of words to describe the hitting in football, the tackling, including from my high school football coach, but beautiful wasn't one of them. This president of the United States thinks the violence is one of the beautiful things about football. And that is the president of the United States who has brought us closer to nuclear war with his rhetoric than any president in history. There is a straight line from Donald Trump's violence in football rhetoric to his Rocket Man rhetoric. The president may have said those things because he knew that reporting by Politico was about to reveal that his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, did something that Trump voters were taught to believe you should be locked up for. Under the headline, Kushner used private email to conduct White House business. And that has led to the breaking news report tonight that Trump used private email to conduct White House business. Ivanka Trump. The New York Times is reporting that at least 6 of President Trump's closest advisors occasionally used private email addresses to discuss White House matters, current and former officials said on Monday. The officials include Reince Priebus, Steve Bannon, Stephen Miller, economic advisor Gary Cohn, and of course, Ivanka Trump. If the president knew that those reports were coming, he might do or say something to get the American news media talking about something else. It worked. But it might be a surprise tonight to the president that the NFL, including the owners and coaches, are standing so strongly against his comments. Tonight, the Dallas Cowboys and owner Jerry Jones linked arms and knelt before the national anthem in what they say was a statement of equality and unity. The Cowboys, who are playing the Arizona Cardinals in Arizona, were booed by the crowd.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.